I'm ranking the 10 greatest aerial war movies ever made, from the most insane stunts ever filmed to the movie where pilots had to break real Air Force rules just to get the shot. Let's see which movie comes out on top. Skyfighters is what you put on when you want to see flying. And I'm talking about real flying, not just some actor in a green box. The story's not the reason you watch it. The movie follows a couple of pilots tracking down a missing plane during an air show, but what matters here is what's in the air. The director got full access to the French Air Force and brought in some of their top pilots to do the work. They used real Mirage 2000 jets and shot everything for real. No CGI, no models, nothing fake. All those insane maneuvers are 100% real. The team attached a specially designed camera to a Mirage 2000 so it could follow the other jets in flight, since only another Mirage could keep up at those speeds. At the start, the Air Force gave strict safety rules, minimum 500 feet above the ground and plenty of space between planes. By the end of the shoot, the pilots, after proving what they could do, got the okay to drop those limits. The planes ended up flying just 10 feet off the ground and as close as 3 feet from each other. You get shots you just don't see anywhere else. There's even a scene early on where one jet does a barrel roll over another, which is a direct shout out to Chuck Yeager's famous stunt in John Wayne's Jet Pilot. Iron Eagle is pure 80s and none of it makes sense if you stop to think. Doug Masters, played by Jason Gedrick, is an 18-year-old who loves flying but can't get into the Air Force. When his dad gets shot down and sentenced to death in some made-up Arab country, Doug teams up with Colonel Chappie Sinclair, borrows a pair of F-16 and launches a rescue mission. The U.S. Air Force took one look at the script, where kids hack base computers and steal fighter jets, and wanted nothing to do with it. So all those F-16s you see, that's Israeli Air Force hardware with a new paint job. But here's where the movie really stands out. They brought in real stunt pilots. Art Scholl, a legend in the field, did the flying for the snake scene the same year he was killed filming Top Gun's flat spin scene. Iron Eagle was actually meant for a summer 1986 release, but got pushed up to January to avoid going head-to-head with Top Gun. So every time you watch those flight shots, remember, that's all real flying, no computer effects. This is the German-British biopic that actually tries to give the Red Baron some humanity. The focus is Manfred von Richthofen. He starts as the hotshot ace, but falling in love changes how he sees the war. Interesting casting note, they almost had Val Kilmer play the Baron, even though he would have been at least 20 years older than the real guy ever lived to be. The movie does take a lot of liberties. History gets moved around, and some fans got annoyed at that. Most of the interesting details about Red Baron's flying career barely get a mention, but still, the movie's really enjoyable if only for the flying scenes alone. The flying sequences put you right in the cockpit with those classic biplanes, and the filmmakers go all out to make the dogfights feel authentic. They use stunning, detailed replicas and period-accurate backgrounds, though sometimes the paint jobs are a little off. Aviation fans get a lot out of just seeing the planes on screen. Midway stands out for how it shows the big picture of war. It's not about single heroics, it's about the pressure on admirals, the risks they take, and how much history comes down to what they do with limited info. The film's based on the American victory at Midway Island in 1942, filmed in a docudrama style, looking at how the whole thing unfolded. The cast alone makes this worth watching. Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda, James Coburn, Robert Mitchum. A lot of the cast, the director, and even the screenwriter were actual war vets. Most of the dogfights you see actually come from 1942 newsreels, cropped and reformatted to fit the big screen. Real onboard scenes were filmed on the USS Lexington, a fast carrier from 1943. Production only had 3 working World War II planes, so stock footage does the heavy lifting. That made-for-TV vibe is noticeable here, but the focus stays on what it takes to win a battle, strategy, risk, and the cost that comes with it. The final countdown goes for one of the best time travel setups. What if a modern nuclear-powered carrier with all its F-14 showed up the day before Pearl Harbor? The production had rare access to the real USS Nimitz during a training period. The Navy got involved as a publicity boost, so most of what you see is shot on an actual carrier at sea. Real crew members fill the background. 48 of them are credited as actors or extras. Behind the scenes, there's a ton of true stories. They filmed an emergency landing as it happened. The shot where an F-14 gets caught by the net is 100% real, and the pilot's wife's scream ended up in the movie. One cameraman and his camera literally got blown off deck by jet exhaust. Twice. They mounted cameras on Navy jets and used a B-25 bomber and a Jet Ranger helicopter to film from the air. Navy pilots handled the dogfights, and one of the best shots, a low pull-up that ends just 100 feet over the ocean, wasn't even scripted. If you want the closest thing to seeing a real carrier in action, with real flying and genuine Navy help, this movie delivers. This one doesn't have a big Hollywood budget, but what it does have is heart. The story covers those legendary Polish pilots who joined the Royal Air Force and fought in the Battle of Britain. Actual military pilots praise the look of the aerial combat here. For most of it, what you see is as close to the real thing as possible. CGI is there, but it never gets out of control. You get close-ups and ground shots of Bf-109s. Technically, they use G models instead of the E models that flew over Britain in 1940, but the CGI fixes that. The British Army uniforms are off too, wrong tailoring, insignia, and color. But once those planes take off, you forget about that. There are some obvious flaws. The story jumps around, flashbacks get confusing, and the character work doesn't always land. The ending rushes to the finish. But if you love aviation, it's all about the flying. Get to a theater if you can, or just crank up the surround sound at home. For a couple hours, you're right up there in 1940. The story goes out of sequence, a bit like Tarantino, and you don't get introduced to every major character. But if you know your World War II history, their roles become clear. The flying scenes really are excellent, and the true story gets solid representation. Overall, this is a movie worth seeing for those aerial battles alone. 12 O'Clock High is one of the first Hollywood films to look seriously at the psychological toll of war. Gregory Peck plays a general who takes over a B-17 bomber unit, and you watch him push these men back into fighting shape. The U.S. Navy still uses it in leadership training, the Air Force teaches it at its officer training school, and even Harvard Business School runs it as a case study in organizational change. Surviving bomber crews often point to this film as the most accurate depiction Hollywood ever managed of their war. One of the most unforgettable moments happens right at the start. That B-17 crash landing isn't a special effect. Stunt pilot Paul Mantz gets paid $4,500 to put the bomber down for real, and he walks away from the wreck. That stands as the biggest payday for a single stunt until the 1970s. The Air Force supplied the film with a dozen old B-17s rebuilt to combat specs. The result is that you see real bombers, real flying, and real danger up on the screen. Nobody really expected Top Gun Maverick to deliver the way it did, but this is the new standard for aerial action. The original was already a classic, but Maverick took things to another level. Tom Cruise came in and designed a full aviation boot camp for the actors and made sure everyone could handle the physical demands of flying in real F-18. Green screens get left behind. The cast climbs into the cockpit, and those cameras capture every maneuver and every G-force. You feel every turn. The callbacks to the 1986 original still work, of course, but Maverick stands on its own. There are actual stakes, and the story means something. Every aerial sequence delivers. You get the sensation of speed, the violence of real jet combat, and that sense of being there that no other modern film has pulled off. Christopher Nolan brings a new kind of immersion to aerial combat with Dunkirk. While he does invent some characters to shape the narrative, the rest is pulled from real events, right down to the way the Royal Air Force pilots fly over the beach. Nolan relies on first-hand accounts to get the details right, and it shows. Nolan's obsession with practical effects pays off. Period-correct planes fly across the screen, and he even repaints World War II-era ships to match British designs. When you see the aerial dogfights, that's real flying and real planes. Zero green screen. Nolan and his crew figure out how to put those pilots and those 40s aircraft through genuine dogfights, and they build perfect replicas for the crash scenes. No one risks a vintage Spitfire, but everything else is as close to the real thing as you can get. The result is beauty. Those scenes up in the air are just astonishing, and you understand instantly why the Spitfire is such a legend. Tora is monumental in every sense. 3 directors, 1 American, 2 Japanese, worked together to cover the Pearl Harbor attack from both sides, and the result is a film that puts historical detail over spectacle. Some of the technical advisors took part in Pearl Harbor itself. The goal is accuracy, and for the most part, they nail it. There are some hardware hiccups. Mitsubishi A6M0s in the movie are really Harvard and BT Valiant trainers painted up with Japanese markings. And there's a red stripe on every plane that shouldn't be there for all the carriers involved. Still, the level of care is obvious, and the intention is always to get as much right as possible. The film's scope is huge. 3 years of planning, 8 months of shooting, and Japanese input throughout. Every aerial sequence matters. You see the planning, the execution, and the confusion on both sides. Some critics call it dull, but for anyone who wants to see what the real Pearl Harbor looked like, this is as close as it gets.